Katie Tandy is a journalist, playwright, and co-founding editor of PULP, an online arts and culture publication centering sexuality and reproductive rights. She's working on a forthcoming memoir braiding together stories from her childhood with human physiology. And when she's not writing, she's singing with the Oakland rock band, the Shaddocks. July Westhale is an essayist, translator, and the award-winning author of Trailer Trash and Via Negativa, which Publishers Weekly called stunning in the Starred Review. Her most recent work can be found in McSweeney's, the National Poetry Review, Prairie Schooner, Calyx, Hayden's Fairy Review, and the Huffington Post, among other places. She also has an inventively named collection of salty chapbooks. When she's not teaching, she works as a co-founding editor of PULP Magazine, and you can find out more at julywesthale.com. Couple of house items before we get started. For those of you who are here with us on the Zoom, you're muted obviously, but please show the writer some love, whether that be through snaps or claps or your favorite emojis. If you have anything that you'd like to ask, as I mentioned earlier, please ask in the chat and I'll relay the questions at the end of the program. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to July and Katie. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Delighted to see you guys.
Thank you, Evan. Lovely to meet you all, however, virtually. I wish I could see your faces and smell your bodies even at this point. July really has written a stunning book of poetry, and I'm really honored to open up this celebration of her words and her brain. I'm reading a short section of the book I'm trying to work on. This chapter is about my mother, and the pairing with the human body is decomposition. So here we go. My mother was beautiful and taught to wield it by her own beautiful mother. And me, what was I taught? Just what can I wield? My mother never said, smile that smile, sway that sway. It's our weapon and currency. But she finds the world as cruel and shallow worshiping as I do. She tried to make me more consumable without breaking my spirit. She felt that to be a woman was likely hard enough for any human to bear. A lifetime of cruel shoes, bad money, nose ignored, but to be an ugly woman was something she couldn't let her daughter endure. Human decomposition begins just 4 minutes after death, 240 seconds. Just wait a goddamn minute, I just died, I'm adjusting. But no, the onset of our bodily dissolution is callous, tunnel visioned. It's governed by a process called autolysis, otherwise known as self-digestion, a destruction of cells managed by one's own enzymes. In the wake of our death, the cells in our body become increasingly deprived of oxygen, and the carbon dioxide in our blood increases while our pH decreases, making it more acidic. The cellular waste begins to accumulate and begins to poison its own cells. Simultaneously, our now rogue and unchecked cellular enzymes begin to dissolve our cells from the inside out, beginning in tissues like the brain and liver with high enzyme and water content, respectively, before beginning to rupture, well, everything. Our bodies are comprised of 90% bacteria. In truth, we are barely human, barely ourselves. The faces we call our own, the smell of our bodies, the timbre of our voice, the shape of our lips, the lilt of our eyes as we meet the gaze of someone we love. It's all infested with bacteria that wants us to function, to live, until that very flesh that sustains it dies. Our bodies, our bacteria, are opportunistic. Make no mistake. It cares not who you are, but what you can offer it. The very body I've berated and brandished, the flesh and face that I abhor and adore and try hard to love, is impervious to my affection. When we moved to Lawrenceville, New Jersey from Chapel Hill, North Carolina, I am in 6th grade. I am 11. I am introduced to the class, show and tell style, by my teacher in the front of the classroom. I was a few weeks late in starting the school year. My parents laughed that they'd nearly forgotten that I was supposed to be in school. I smile into their faces and introduce myself, hands hanging by my sides. A boy leans over to his friend and pretends to whisper, "I thought girls from the South were supposed to be hot." Everyone laughs. The teacher scolds him. My face burns, but I keep smiling into his face. "I get it," my smile says. "I'm not pretty. I'm kind of a weird disappointment, and I can see the humor in that." My face reassures them. But as it turned out, it didn't really matter what my face said. That day started 2 years of being bullied badly, shouted at in the halls, laughed at in the lunchroom, pretty heads huddled together and whispered. Girls who once populated my living room for sleepovers started calling my house and leaving voicemails, calling me a freak. My parents make me bring the tape into school and play it out loud in a mediation meeting with the guidance counselor. The girls, Crystal and Amy, their hair hanging lank, their skin sallow beneath the long, buzzing overhead light, seem genuinely sorry. They hang their heads. They tell me they didn't realize how hurtful it was to call my house again and again and again to tell me what a freak I was. I stare at the table as the cassette tapes rolls around and around, and I tell them, my eyes briefly meeting theirs, it's fine. I accept your apology. And in a way I did. I am definitely probably a freak, I thought, an aberration, an unexpected irregularity sprung from two lovely, if troubled people. It's 1994, and I'm climbing to the third floor of our old and aching house to our dusty and austere guest room to scream Green Day's Dookie till I am hoarse. I'm leaping and gnashing my teeth. I'm feeling like a dog in heat, grinding against the bedpost and flopping on the ground. And I'm half crying and masturbating in an almost attic to what I know was pretty bad punk music, while everyone else moved through the world I could only glimpse but never quite approach. Jesus Christ, when I think about being 13, the humiliation of just being alive, being shaped the way I was, having to live in the brain I was given. I've just gotten my period. The sensation of trying to pull my tampon out for the first time feels so foreign and painful, I scream for my mother to come help me. I am poised but unable to strike. I have feverish dreams of all kinds of sex. I've been touching myself for 6 years, but I'm a child. My sexuality, my desire, my beauty, or lack thereof, my ability to perform and please the gaze is buried, but it's a shallow grave. It's a slack-legged calf taking its first turn around the meadow. I am leaving the orthodontist's office. I am invisible. I am a squirrely little ghost. I slide down the hall. I am working my mouth over my new braces like a horse at the bit. It feels like all these nightmares I have, like one of those dreams where all my teeth come loose and I keep spitting them into my palm one by one. Or I trip on the stairs and when I lift my head, I gingerly touch my mouth and find it's filled with sharp white shards like splinters. Or the other one where I try to scream, but my jaw's locked tight, tighter. And when I will my mouth to open, my teeth just shatter instead. I can barely close my mouth over the metal. The edges dig into my lips and gums. I can't smile normally. My entire mouth tastes like rust. A wave of anger washes over me. I want to bring my fist down at every tiny tray of shining, cruel little tools. I want to rip everything out of my mouth. I liked my smile. By 13, I was convinced I'd never be a pretty girl anyway. The braces felt like a lipstick on a pig situation. Moving teeth wasn't going to straighten my freakdom or people's seeming aversion to me. I wasn't disfigured, but I felt that underneath I was, maybe. Maybe people could tell all the weird shit I was constantly thinking about. Maybe they were responding to something on an animal level, like dogs can smell cancer, that my rip-off Mary Janes were actually my mother's old tap shoes with the metal removed. Maybe it was my oniony smell, my penchant for the Mills Brothers and the Andrews Sisters, music that my grandparents slow danced to. Maybe it was my homemade lunches, a freckled face, 2 long feet. Whatever it was, proximity to me was social death. So I'm walking in slow motion down the hall of my old dentist's. The 4-room office was set in a leafy cul-de-sac just minutes from our house. I can feel the carpet beneath my sneakers, my low-top Converse cutting slightly into my ankle, and I hate myself for giving in. Assistants bustle from cubicle to cubicle, smiling with their eyes over papery blue masks. I turn to look over my shoulder at the plastic-covered seat where I'd quietly snickered at the orthodontist and my mother and told them I didn't need and wouldn't get braces. That was a month ago. I like crooked teeth. It's my face, I say. Braces are ugly and expensive and I don't need them. My teeth are fine. This is just what I look like. The orthodontist smiles, his giant, white, scary smile. It's not just for aesthetics, he says. It's for your occlusion, your bite. Having crooked teeth causes problems when you're older. I was suspicious of doctors. I was suspicious of everybody. I don't know, I say. I feel like you're supposed to say that, like it's literally your job to get people to get braces. I sit there unbelieving that my mother won't intercede, that she can't see the hustle that they're pulling. I silently beg her to nod in her perfectly polite and cutting way. Katie's right, we're leaving, and get me the hell out of there. But instead, I hear her say, Lammy, it's important. I promise I wouldn't make you do it if I didn't think it was important. But a month later, the doctor has snapped off his gloves and I've spit pink foam into a sink and I've been defeated. I look even worse than I imagined. My mother is sitting in the tiny waiting room. She's reading a magazine, her slender legs crossed in light blue jeans. There's 4 inches of her thin white ankle hovering above brown loafers. She looks up as I approach. She senses me, as she always does. I lift my mouth into a smile, and her face twists with pity. I'm sorry I'm ugly. I know you know I'm ugly, and I'm weird, and I can't help it, I tell her silently. But before I can say a word, she has rearranged her own mouth into an enormous grin, and she is taking my face between her thin hands and saying, Lammy, it's not so bad. And I love her for not lying, because it is bad, but not so bad. She believes that in this moment, I am that much closer to pretty, to emerging out the other side of myself. What she doesn't realize is that I will spend a lot of my life trying not to be pretty or palatable, that I do not want to emerge. In truth, I hate it when people describe other people's faces. You can never picture them, not really. But using the words I have and the faces you might know, my mother in her youth looked a bit like Natalie Wood. Long, almost black, bone-straight hair, a big upturned triangle nose, nostrils flared, a giant thin-lipped smile, big square white teeth, beautifully equine. White, translucent, fragile-looking skin, something feral, something sad, stared out of her hooded blue eyes. Pretty. Haunted. As a child, I pored through photographs of her face, searching it for notice of my own future. Would anyone ever look at me with desire? Envy? Would I haunt my own daughter? Her beauty to me afforded her such power. In talking to her recently, in trying to articulate just what the hell I was feeling myself about aging, about the creeping betrayals of my body and what beauty affords women in this world, she told me her face never made her feel powerful. I just thought you had to be pretty to be liked, she said. I just wanted people to like me. She too had been bullied growing up, particularly about her thick glasses, she's legally blind, and buck teeth. She has a bifurcated sense of self. There was her as a child. I was very homely, she says, but I had a good personality, and her adult self, which emerged around 16. She describes going to the country club one afternoon, and one of the waiters did a cartwheel when he saw her. Braces off, glasses off, pretty, finally. This was something to celebrate. Have you ever used those microfilm machines at the library? It allows you to rapidly scan through newspapers, fast forwarding through time, scrolling madly through days, weeks, months, years, decades, centuries. The ink and face is a whizzing blur until you catch what you want and it snaps into place. I'm searching for my mother as daughter. I see a small, shy child born to a young mother in Rye, New York, a beautiful mother, She's being raised as an Irish Catholic. A little girl, the second oldest among 3 brothers. Giant eyes blink out behind thick glasses, and she's being beaten. For spilling milk, for talking back, for being late, for being. That same child is told God is watching. God is everywhere. My mother talks about believing that God could read her thoughts. She believed he was inside her. There was a dull, throbbing fear of always being known, of dreading her own consciousness. I didn't mean to think it. Surely he knows that too. Perhaps he knows it's not me. Perhaps it's actually him saying all those things. I want to touch myself. I want to hit my mother back. And seeing if I like it, God was testing her, always testing. The fighting between her mother and father grows bitter and ugly. They divorce. Her mother tries to turn her against her father. She tells that little girl to get away from the door when he comes knocking to pick her up to play golf. A little boy is telling her she looks just like Piggy. What saves her is that she hasn't read Lord of the Flies yet. You take that child and let her grow up frightened, but tightly bound by family. You take that little girl and you give her a new wealthy stepfather. A kind but silent and severe man with children of his own. He hates her brothers. You take that child and watch as her mother gets excommunicated from the Catholic Church for a divorce, and you watch as she reels back her tiny hand and slaps another girl square in the mouth in the playground when she calls my grandmother a whore. That child grows to be a beauty. At 16, the braces and glasses come off, but her self-loathing and fear is never shed. She is stepping into her skin like a crab molting in reverse. Her father, who she adores, dies the same year. And she slowly but surely fails out of 2 colleges before following my father to Columbia in New York City. They get married. They try to be a family. Take the wet squeaking sound of a cork slipping from a bottle of white wine. See the small lead stones piling in the gut of her 11-year-old son, her 4-year-old daughter, me. See the middle of the night fights. She's confronting my father. She's screaming, where did the rent money go? Why were the checks bounced? Why do you lie to me? Why? Click, stop. I think my mother clung to her beauty like a limpet to a rock, grateful for it easing her survival, but resenting its fragility, its susceptibility to erosion, to decomposition. That's all, folks, on my end. July's up next. Gird your loins. It's so beautiful. Good luck out there.
Thank you so much. Oh, Katie, that's so good. I'm so glad to finally be able to hear a little bit of it after being around for the process of it. And God, nobody could pay me enough money in the world to be 13 again.
Oh my God.
Lord.
So awful. Well, I'm glad that resonated. I'm sorry you also had that experience of being 13, but perhaps it is truly universal. God.
Yeah, I think so. So before I get started, I just wanted to say thank you to all of you in Facebook Live land for coming out for a reading on a Thursday night. I know I have some people on the East Coast who are up quite late watching this, so thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you to Katie for reading alongside me, and Evan for helping us to organize this. I had a realization recently that I've known Evan for 10 years. We met 10 years ago at an anger management reading, which is a reading series that doesn't even exist anymore. So I wanted to, I've been starting all of my readings off by reading a poem by a writer whose work I owe a great debt. And tonight I wanted to kick off with a poem by C. Dale Young, which is called Cancer and Complaint at Midsummer. Because the silence of the dead, that blue expanse of sky about to ashen here above my head, is easily ignored. Our tears are blamed on flowers whitening limbs of trees, the very air with hymns of summer pollen no one hears except for women, old, devout. And now these humid months, dispute them not. Midsummer has no name among the dead, no Latin root to which it can be traced, no swarm of conjugations to decipher, so little left to write this summer. My mind now weak in handling form, which I cling to just the same. And now I'll read from Via Negativa, which came out just a few weeks ago. And for those of you who aren't familiar with this concept, it is the process of describing something by describing what it is not. And often it's used to talk about God or divinity, but in this manuscript, in this collection, I use it to talk about larger things like divinity, but also ars poetica or poetic manifesto and wanting. So a good number of poems in this collection are called either Via Negativa or ars poetica, and occasionally love poem. So I'm going to start off with Katie Tandy's favorite poem in this book, which is Via Negativa. 1. When the man from the headline thought about being a boy, he was a boy. He loved the war, or the dogma of it, like the dappled light of sun across a reference book. To prove himself, he married a woman with history, children, 2 boys who in turn loved war stories before he knew them. Once upon a time, they were bantam children with bendable bodies and brains like open atlases. 2. His wife left no note, just her boys, just a poem. Something, 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 season shifting, something, something. He had read so much of her poetry, he knew when burning animals were real and when they weren't. 3. He made a rue the day he killed them, fastening the flower so it whispered as he whisked. Sun sliced the blinds like smiling clementines, and the skin of onions grinned at the ceiling fan, which said, don't, 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 until he made the older boy flip the switch. He lined them up before the floral wallpaper, the grand jury of botany doing its thing, and like love, the gun bloomed. 1, 2, 3. This next poem is called The Secret Title of Every Good Poem Might Be Tenderness, which is a Galway Kennel line. What do you mean you don't weep for a sweeping score, a standing ovation, my body backlit? You're being mean today, calling the cats in from outside, though they delight. A whale squeals, cyclone, 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 like a girl on a gravitron. I wait for short circuit chartreuse, behind the eyelids green, the sky to play paperboy. I am unprepared. My basement cradles the deep freeze of holiday ham, wine too cheap to age. I know the names of my neighbors through glass held to the walls, eavesdropping their municipal dissatisfactions. Now we scout the heavens for a wall of debris, the peep show of chair legs, the wind dying, the earth below making way for somber cordage. Do we throw roses here? What is the protocol for pallbearers of disaster? Like magic or physics, blue-white snaps 5, 6, 7, 8. The power lines fall all over themselves in tap dance. I catch you staring at my frame like an old house. My heart flashes green. You are grinning like a chump. I grew up not terribly far from here, about 45 minutes northeast, and there's a freeway that connects to a larger freeway, but what's distinct about this freeway is it's one of the highest speed limits in California. You can go approximately 5 miles faster than you can pretty much go on any other freeway. It's called the 505, and it claimed a fair number of people while I was growing up. So this is a poem called The 505. Has an epigraph by Lee Young Lee, which is, but I see these flowers and they seize my mind, and I can no more unsee them than I can undream this. Before dying, the man spans himself like a loon beneath a chromograph moon, noting orchards blooming apple scab. Okay, this is not a field, even as the boulevards give us nightgowns to ward chill, even as they make of us wardens. Okay, he is walking the star-charred freeway. Maybe there's a phosphorescence, a glare in an instant of impact, where one sun dims and the other must live in neon, forever with its deceased brilliance. We see feathers ubiquitously, median, desire lines off the roadway. The earth respectfully bows her pole in recitation, and the myth of crickets is born and then born away. So many elegiac spores popping their rotten spring mouths off. The apples in their blackened nests let out big belly breaths. What else can silent witness do but dowry us, yoke us, wed us, honeymoon us, make us pace the widow's walk, fill our mouths with the ashes of our own hush? I wrote this next poem when I thought that big giant California fires were going to be maybe a one-time thing. So this is for the Tubbs Fire, 2017, and it's called California Burning. And now the horses are as omnipresent as the news. Fleeing thickets, an invisible hand parting red smoke for them. We are in wine country. Ranchers keep extravagant breeds, vineyard palominos, dappled darlings on purple-tongued hills. Headlines click like loafers down linoleum. Containment, 0%. And the starving ground, eating it up, saving nothing for later. I start taking notes. Containment, something in a container, fire Tupperware. We were just in the Smokies, late fog necking with foothills. I could have I could have blossomed, turning the curve to a bright, many-stemmed bouquet of wild horses, thighs shaking before a silky sky. Running because it felt good, blowing in the wind as if their roots were still attached. This next poem is named after the Jorge Luis Borges short story by the same name, which is The Secret Miracle. The night before I was executed by firing squad, I had a sex dream. A baptismal chimera just like a romp in the hay. It was stupendous. And when I woke soused in self, I didn't even mind the cold shoulders of Winchesters designed for my heart, the barrel lumens like brainless eyes, gazing upon me with ardor. And how like love it was to beam back at them, divining which suitors held the blanks. I recently moved, not of my own choice, unfortunately, but I used to have these awful neighbors. And for those of you who are in close community with me, you heard about these neighbors all the time. And as much to my chagrin, they are all throughout this book because I would be writing and they would be doing very unneighborly things while I was writing. So this is one of the instances in which my terrible neighbors show up in this book. This is called Dear John Cheever. How lovely your rhododendrons. Your fence, rounded like toast points. Your baby's knees are so edible. Those are beautiful violets. It doesn't matter that they're passé. My neighbors, we share the same sun, the same waves of light. We pretend not to notice each other's dogs when they shit near the gift flowers. Oh, don't worry, I didn't hear a thing. Nor the piling of takeout flourishing like jade on the porch. It is none of my business how you like your eggs, or if you're getting laid regularly. However, straight as the crow flies, your moans penetrate my frittata. We wave hours later on our way elsewhere. When a brick burst the bubble of my living room, I scoured for similar cannonades, studying you for your most hateable qualities. The untidy way you hedge your lawn, the red dust like blood on your palm. The Great American Novel. Some modern Moby Dick pivots on man and behemoth choice, a certain choice, a lying awake choice. Upon a dark, dim, daily thought, stay or go, jetsam or flotsam, anchor to only be extraneous. Why be tethered, prone to blight or scourge? Why be daily dithering over a year in numbers? They are symbolic, heavy, and swollen. Farther out in the novel, a derrick, barnacle-ridden many ships, probably a tribute to FDR, and several sailors or laborers assist his lineage. All terribly small, all potent tempests. From here they live a world away, in separate orbit, on a pump of grease slick with nothing to do with roots and dirt, the gnarled mess of urban planning. Somebody constructed the crane, the same named bird who thrives on fish and grain. Somebody taught us to sew attentively, arrange the rows of start so they are connectedly singular. Give us strength. Somebody rules us all. Love poem. I am in a basement with many U's inside, like a prism or the Pentagon, like your body is the US government and you are bombing everyone. You bomb me by waggling your hips, your cock like a short wick, your cunt like a salted cobalt bomb. All of us in the basement, playing doctor, eating beans, making lists of people we'd like to kill. I can't think of a single one, so I write my own name in its many manifestations, and like that, I am God, on my knees in a church pew, spewing boiled song from a book of hymns. And I'll close with a poem called Jump Seat. You've known your past since it could stand on tiptoes. Still, you've never lived there. Passed through, yes. Wrecked even. Lost your security deposit on the house of yourself. A hovel of broken plaster, burnt crop circles left by cigarettes in the shag. You wear the same busted shutter eyes, the same climax shutters of fat years, dark rings of lean ones. In time, you'll learn to behave as if the two of you found an alley and fucked it out, your current spheroid hips bruising your past vertical thighs. Or you won't, and it will stray from you, or steal your own gun and shoot you with it. One day your life will be like a chipped marble that won or lost a game too many. In time, you'll learn that triumph and sore losing can be altogether the same. Leave the child you were to trek, lost in the acreage of herself, or pick her up and slow dance, her untamed feet on the tops of your own mother's shoes. Remember that she has no reason to be warned of pockmarked districts which her cartography has not yet charted. I would say feast, but it's been done. Sit instead, or float. Watch as if from a jump seat of a tiny airplane. All of you, a land below. All of you with the visage of one pretending to pilot, pretending to know where we are going.
Can you hear me? Am I unmuted? Yes. It was really wonderful. Thank you. I could listen to the whole book. I should get you to do a personal audiobook. Wait, you unmute you, July.
Okay.
There you are.
Hi.
Hi. That was so beautiful. I don't want to take time from folks if they want to ask you questions. I don't see any in the queue, and I certainly have some if you'd be willing to field my quandaries. I don't know what protocol is necessarily.
Yeah, and I have some for you as well.
Great. Certainly, and I apologize in advance. I think you can't help but run other people's work through like the own lenses in which you're trying to examine stuff. And so some of the language and the imagery that you conjure, particularly like the trifecta, which is particularly wonderful vis-a-vis God, right? Of like the body and perhaps death and God writ large, capital G, lower G. And one of the poems is called Untold Pact. But I was just sort of, curious how you begin to untangle it all. Like, do you have a personal relationship with God yourself that you're using as a lens to run some of these relationship poems through? Is it about projecting yourself into other people's sort of psyches? Is it, I'm just sort of curious, like your way into talking about a lot of these things.
Great question. Thank you.
Yeah.
So those who have read Trailer Trash know that I was raised pretty devoutly Southern Baptist. But so there is a sense of, no matter how critically I put a lens to my own formation within that doctrine and how long I've been away from the church, that's still there. That's still a part of my tissue. But really, in this case, I became very interested in the larger idea of poet or writer as conduit to the divine, which is an historic connection, right? So liturgical texts and their connection to ballad forms, or their connection to rhyme and meter, and the ways in which form can create a kind of hypnosis in the body that is akin to dancing, and how that plays into devotionals. But thinking about, Ben Lerner has a long essay, short book called On the Hatred of Poetry. And in it, he talks about and examines this history with people's kind of love-hate relationship with poetry. And he asks a lot of questions like, why did Plato kick poets out of the Republic, right? If poets have this history of being both dangerous in situations of political duress, so like during dictatorships, poets are exiled, but they also have this connection to the divine and of being ambassadors to the divine that only makes them fail in that regard. So is the hatred that they are inadequate, or is the hatred that they are dangerous? Because you can't have both, and yet culturally we do. Right. So I was really, really interested in what that relationship looked like from a critical standpoint, and then also combined with a more bodily experience of that, you know, of that kind of divinity.
Interesting too, because of course there's all, you know, the active sublimation, particularly the female presenting body as a vehicle that's too powerful, right? And thus must be controlled lest, you know, it overruns you or something, you know, which I think is really interesting too. And certainly, like, I had a dear friend who grew up as a born again Christian, and her body like bucking with the spirit, like that ecstatic joy of God, penetrating your being. I think about that famous, is it Saint Teresa, who's like rising up with the touch of God inside her. It's so rich and wild. And I'm obviously thinking a lot about my mother's own Catholicism and relationship to God. And I mean, it is a very, very rich topic. I'm curious too.
Topic.
Wait, sorry, you froze for a second, Sugar.
Which is that I know. Can you hear me now?
It's coming through now. Yes, sorry.
Okay. So I know that your memoir is taking a particular kind of shape through the body, right? So you read us Decomposition. Can you talk to us about your decision to create this structure and what that is like?
Yeah, I think it's funny, and maybe, which I want to talk to you too about, I realized that my body, for better or worse, felt so part and parcel of growing up as just any sort of little human, as a female human. And it felt like such an adversary, but I was so obsessed with it. I was obsessed with other people's bodies. It was like a tremendous, tremendously fraught thing. And my mother, I would actively watch her like fight against her own Catholicism and be like, be naked, be weird. But she like, you know, I've seen her in her underpants, you know, like 3 times. So it was like a one-way street where she was like, go and blossom. I am in the shadows forever, but you do not have to bear this. This is all to say, I think it's fascinating to put things in a larger context than yourself. Certainly, I mean, I'd like to argue that the stories from childhood are interesting enough, but they're vastly more interesting, I think, when you can take it from the I to the universal. And it's been really healing and curative to learn so much about the human body. Like, I'm not a fool. I don't think, you know, hard-boiled, you know, biologists are going to sit there and read this and be like, that's incredible, I had no idea. But I think for the average human, it's like this, it's a huge font of wonder. Like our bodies are incredible. And so it felt really cool and really right to pair each one of these chapters with this metaphor of body. And as I dug in more, I was like, is this like a gimmick? Does this feel like it's not going to work? But then it got sort of wild, and the threads sort of reveal themselves as you go. And which I know you feel this way too. Like, I'm someone who loves school. And so it sort of was like, giving myself that gift, like going to the library and teaching myself something, which feels really wonderful. So yeah, I hope it works, so to speak. But yeah, it's a wacky choice, but I think I'm into it.
Well, I think too that there's a lot of conversation around the structure of a book within writing community and what the container is, right? What the shape of it is. And I think having it be the human body, there's so much there to explore. And then it also creates a kind of actual embodiedness between this something very cerebral as talking about one's life from the sort of dishonesty of hindsight, right? Which is what really good memoir does well, is it says, listen, let me spin you this old yarn, but also understanding time and place, and that I am here now telling you about Katie then, right? But to do it through the body places it in this contained way, and it enacts this by talking about the relationship between bodies in the narrative. It also enacts that content in a way that I think is really, really quite stunning. I'm so excited to see more of that. I mean, it was such a good visceral piece that we got to be witness to. I can see how it could function really well as a large collection.
Thank you. I hope it really works. I have the liver coming down the pipeline, and which I'm really excited. And the heart is 2 chapters. Obviously, there's so much there, but yeah, it's really, really wonderful. I'm glad that it moves your brain, because I respect your brain. So I'll take that accolade for now. I'm curious. I want to ask you, when and how do you know that you're like on the stallion riding through like the forest towards a collection? Does it start with a particular image you're trying to capture? Does it start with a conversation? Does it start with something more cerebral, like a thread you're reading somewhere else and you're like, I have an iteration on that? How does the process begin for you for this collection? Oh dear. Is it me? Is it you?
So my internet, of course, cut out. Would you ask that question again?
Of course.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. It started with a really weird metaphor, which I will repeat, which is like you're on a horse and you're like through the forest, and you're like, oh, wait, I'm in a collection now. And I'm wondering like what that initial, like where that momentum comes from, where that like clarifying moment emerges out of. Is it an image? Is it a conversation you want to capture? A terrifying newspaper article about someone murdering their sons? Like, yeah, I'm always curious how other artists and writers realize they're sort of onto something, so to speak.
Yeah, so great question. I love this question. It's one of my favorite things to talk about, because there seems to be a lot of mythos surrounding it, that like, you know, you're like Rilke and you're like in a castle by yourself somewhere, and then just inspiration strikes and you're like, voila, like, but really what I have found to be true several books into the world is that I'm often, well, when I'm a sort of insatiably curious and monomanic person who becomes really hyper-focused and obsessed on one thing and kind of deep dives.
That helps.
It helps.
Yeah.
And I'm very interested in utilizing poetry to try to solve for what I think of are unsolvable X's. And so like the question, for example, of like, is the poet an ambassador to the divine? I don't fucking know. Right. But I sure had a great time writing a whole book that thought about that.
Sure.
Right now I'm working on a collection that reimagines the epic and does so through the escapism that's coming about during the pandemic, right? And it's a really wonderful, like, fantastical world. But I've noticed that starting with an unsolvable question and just thinking in all directions of that unsolvable question is a great way to structure a narrative. Additionally, I rarely know what I'm working on until I'm 3/4 of the way through it. And apparently that's
mentioned that. Wild, yeah.
Yeah, and that once I realize what I'm working on, then the last fourth just kind of zooms by. And that's what one of my writing mentors called the cooking with gas moment. Like, it's so clever and it's such a good feeling. There's no drug like that one small window moment of you're like, I know what I'm doing and I know what I need to do in order to complete this thing. So it often starts with some kind of intellectual, existential, socio-political, or otherwise noted problem that I'm trying to work through.
Yeah.
And then ends up taking shape from there. But it also, when in my very early days of writing, I was actually just talking to Penella about this today, but I would often say, I would like to write a book about this, right? I would like to write a book, for example, about Virginia Woolf. You tell yourself you're going to write a book about Virginia Woolf, and you end up writing a book about your childhood in 1980s and 90s Riverside County during the PG&E scandal.
Yep.
So that's how well that goes. So, right. So sitting with the really interesting, and I felt very, I've said this before, and for those of you who have been to a couple of readings, I apologize for the repetition, but Carl Phillips said a really wonderful thing to me in the fall last year, where he said, you know, really good writing is just it's just a showcase of a very interesting mind. And I said, oh, how comforting. You just have to have an interesting mind. That's all.
Yeah.
And that's actually rather true.
I think so.
I'm finding.
Yeah. And will you, once you've discovered sort of where you're at in the forest and you're like, this is what is comprising the forest, will you go back and weave in more threads that like solidify that? Yeah, 100%. Got it.
Yeah, 100%. And that's the really nice, clever, organized, methodical part, which is to say, here's what I'm working on, the umbrella of what I'm working on, and now I can see what needs to be filled in. And often it's very visual, like this is a novel I'm working on, so I usually have a visual representation, which is helpful. But I really do think that, and I've also I think that it is, for folks who are writers out there who are thinking about this in their own work, I think what is really helpful is to consider what is really at the crux of the narratives that you most enjoy reading. Right. And for me, I really enjoy reading books of poetry, novels, memoirs, etc., that really try to figure something out, and they walk away with a lot more questions than they started with. My favorite thing, or complicate our understanding of something that we thought we already knew. Sure. So if you know that about yourself, then that very well may be a good direction for you to think about going.
Yeah. Yeah.
What about you?
It's a good question. I think, well, I would say a few things. One is I definitely perseverate in my mind before it ever happens. And I write a lot in my mind. I leave myself weird voice texts a lot. I also write longhand a lot, which is really silly in that I can see the strings on myself that I'm pulling. But when I'm just with the notebook, I'm like, like, it doesn't feel as final. I definitely fall prey to the blinking cursor that's like blank, and it torments me. And it took me a long time to break myself of the first sentence has to be like beautiful and compelling for me to move on. And so writing longhand, it breaks that spell for me, even though I know what I'm doing to myself. I think, yeah, I'm making grotesque freezing faces. I'm sure I'm overly animated. What do I want to say? I definitely have always wanted to write a memoir about growing up. And I definitely have moments of total self-flagellation and wondering if, a little white girl needs to be writing about a dysfunctional childhood. It is one with lots of pain and adventure, but it is not, I don't know without real polishing, which I hope I can do. It's answering those big questions that you're talking about. But I think once I sat down and I was like, I'm really gonna do it, and I told my parents I was really gonna do it, I realized how much I wanted it to be in dialogue with something bigger, as you said, how to put one little body in conversation with all these bodies. I think once again, I started scratching these surfaces, and you start in weird Wikipedia articles, and then you end up in like the bowels of the library with a very sweet librarian who's like, oh yeah, like, global myths of the heart and like archaic, what we used to believe the brain was made of. I mean, it's amazing how the web begins to come together. And it's not without intention, certainly, but there is something, as you said, that there's like a wick that set alight and it really runs with you. But it took me a long time to figure out what that dialogue could be. And I'm thankful I finally did.
Yeah. And I feel so grateful that being a writer isn't a thing where you sort of, well, God, I hope not. I'm speaking sort of generally, I realize, but I really appreciate the reverence for elders that exists in the writing community that doesn't always extend itself to other forms of art. And so my hope is that every 4 or 5 months, I will think I have forgotten how to write. And I will hopefully take that as the opportunity that I'm like breaking into a new kind of knowing is what I'm hoping.
Yeah.
I know we're getting close to 8. I wasn't sure if Evan needed to weigh in on anything, or if there were any other questions from folks out in Facebook land, or.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi. You're both lovely geniuses, and I applaud you both. For those of you out there who are watching, we'll do this. This will be a last call for questions. If you've got one, please drop it in the comments, and I'll relay it. I'll be happy to relay it. I'll take this opportunity to just congratulate you both on being so great, and to congratulate you, July, specifically on Via Negativa. Yeah, congratulations, and
it's so beautiful.
What's the future? What's the future look like? I'm kind of interested just in like how the pandemic has affected your writing and your current project. Like, how you doing?
I feel like the only thing I'm doing really, really well right now is being a writer.
That's no small thing.
Yeah, no, and I'm so grateful for it, but I'm writing like crazy. I don't actually have more time. busier than ever, which is a weird thing, and I'm examining how that happened. But I am working on this new project called Moon that I feel really excited about, that is sort of supposes what would happen through the form of like a re-examined epic. What would happen if the United States specifically was just like, well, we're gonna go to the moon, but then the moon's not available, so they go to the moon's moon. So it's sort of through the vein of, and then they have to try to come home again, right? So like that's what I'm working on right now. And then in addition to that, I've been working for the last couple of years on this speculative fiction novel about big water in California. And honestly, both of those projects work really well under sort of a weird dystopian global crisis situation. So that it's a weird thing to say that context is helping, but it strangely is. It has actually been really wonderful. I was sort of bummed out when my in-person tour was moved online, but honestly, I have been able to do so many events, and I've been able to teach a lot more workshops, and I've also been able to go to poetry readings like 4 nights a week, which my introvert ass would never do in real life. So that sort of literary richness I've found to be really, really wonderful during this time. And that's maybe one of the only things that I think is pretty wonderful during this time. Yeah.
For sure, I relate to that. I think it's been nice to have events with folks who are all over the place, who are able to join in ways that they wouldn't. And yeah, also for me, just to join events from my couch has been quite nice. Yeah. I've been enjoying that. It looks like there are no more questions. Everyone's stunned into enlightenment. So you did it.
Did it.
Yeah. So thank you all for joining us. Katie, thanks for being here and starting us off so wonderfully.
Of course, my pleasure, ever and always.
For sure. And July, congratulations again. Hopefully we can do this in person at some point in the nearest future.
Yeah, I would love that. Until
then, though, let's keep zooming. For those of you who are out there and don't have Via Negativa yet, I dropped the link in the comments. You should get it. you should get it for your friends as well. Check it out, and there it is. There it goes. Don't don't sleep, y'all. This is what you're doing for the next 20 minutes.
Yep.
It's dancing Via Negativa. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Check out our upcoming events, booksmith.com. Check out Katie and July on their websites. Stalk them, be their besties. It's really nice to see y'all's faces and to hear your words tonight.
You too. I'm so proud of you, July.
Thank you.
Not surprised, but proud.
Thank you.
Exactly.
Love you.
Love you.
Thank you, Evan.
Thank you so much, Evan.
My pleasure.
Happy friend anniversary.
Yeah, it's 10 years.
Oh yeah, so cool. That's a long time.
All right. Have a good night, everyone. Good night, Oakland.
Good night, y'all.
Bye.